In today's lesson, we're going to talk about adding and subtracting fractions part 2. Now, in the previous lesson, we learned how to add and subtract fractions, and you may have noticed that they all had the same denominator, which would be great if that were always the case, but often we have different denominators. So how do we add or subtract fractions when they don't have the same denominator, when they're different? Well, of course, we're going to use equivalent fractions, and this is why we had to learn about equivalent fractions before we could add or subtract fractions with different denominators. All right, well, Jessie and Casey each ordered a whole pizza for themselves. Jess ate 3/6 of her pizza, and Casey ate 1/5 of his pizza. How much pizza did they eat in total? So here we can see we've got two fractions, and they have different denominators, so we're going to have to make those denominators the same. Notice also that and the way we're going to do that, of course, is by using equivalent fractions. And here you'll notice that we were asked what the total amount of pizza that they ate is, so we're going to have to add these fractions together. So we want to add 3/6 plus 1/5. All right, now we can find a common denominator by simply multiplying the two denominators together. In the previous lesson, we mentioned about common denominators and lowest common denominators. If you find the lowest common denominator, then you will have less simplifying to do. But if you want to just find a common denominator, you can always just simply multiply the denominators together. So 6 times 5 is 30, so that 30 becomes our new denominator for equivalent fractions. All right, so we had to multiply 6 by 5 to get 30. So what do we have to multiply 3 by? Well, if we multiply the bottom by 5, we have to multiply the top by 5. And 3 times 5 is 15. Now let's look at 1/5. We had to multiply 5 times 6 to get 30. So that means we also have to multiply 1 by 6. And 1 by 6 gives us 6. So now we have 15 over 30 and 6 over 30, and we can go ahead and we can add. So we have the same denominator. Okay, that was step number 1. Make sure the denominator is the same, which we did. And then we can go ahead and add the numerators. So we can do 15 plus 6. Again, make sure you keep the denominator the same. Never add or subtract the denominators. So 15 plus 6 is 21, so we have 21 over 30. Step number 3 says to simplify the fraction, and 3 is a factor of both 21 and 30. So we are going to divide both the numerator and denominator by 3. And 21 divided by 3 is 7, 30 divided by 3 is 10. So we have simplified the fraction, and Jess and Casey ate a total of 7/10 of a pizza. Subtract the following: 7 over 10 minus 2 over 5. Well, if we look at these two denominators, 5 is a factor of 10. So 2 times 5 equals 10, which means that 10 becomes the new denominator and for our equivalent fractions. So 7 over 10 already has a denominator of 10. We have to multiply 5 by 2 to get 10, which means we have to multiply this 2 by 2, and that will give us 4, because we can do anything we want to any fraction as long as we do the same to the top and bottom. All right, so we're now we have 7 over 10 and 4 over 10, so we can go ahead and we can subtract. So 7 over 10 minus 4 over 10. Step number 1 says to make sure denominators are the same, which of course we already did. Step number 2 says to go ahead and subtract the numerator. And so that's going to be 7 minus 4. And notice that we keep the denominator of 10. So go ahead and do that. 7 minus 4 is 3. And so we have 3 over 10. Step number 3 says to simplify the fraction. And we cannot reduce this fraction anymore. So we are finished with our subtraction. 7 over 10 minus 2 over 5 is equal to 3 over 10. Add the following: 5 over 12 plus 3 over 8. Again, we can see that we have different denominators, but we can find a common denominator by multiplying the denominators together. Again, this is not going to be the lowest common denominator, but it's the quickest way to find a common denominator so that they will be the same. So 12 times 8 is 96. And so now 96 becomes the new denominator for our equivalent fractions. All right, so we know that we took 12, we multiplied it by 8 to get 96. So whatever we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So we're going to have to multiply 5 times 8, which is going to give us 40. Now we're going to do the same thing to 3/8. We had to multiply 8 by 12 to get 96. So we have to multiply 3 by 12 to get 36 over 96. So now we have our two fractions and we can add. So 40 over 96 plus 36 over 96. Step number 1, make sure the denominators are the same, which we already did. Then we are going to add the numerators together and notice that we keep the denominator the same. So 40 plus 36 is 76. So we now have 76 over 96. And last step is to simplify the fraction, which is 76 over 96. Now, notice that 76 and 96 are even numbers. So remember, even means that the last digit is going to be a 0, a 2, 4, 6, or an 8. So these are both have a 6. So we can divide each one of those numbers by 2. If we divide 76 by 2, we get 38. Divide 96 by 2, and we get 48. Well, again, you have to look at what the fraction you end up with and notice that these are still even numbers. So we're going to have to divide each of them by 2 again, because it is not yet as simple as it will go. So we divide by 2 again. 38 divided by 2 is 19. 48 divided by 2 is 24. 19 and 24 have no factors in common, so this is as simple as it will go. So 5 over 12 plus 3 over 8 equals 19 over 24. So we ended up dividing by 2 twice. Now, it's possible we could have just done it one step and divided by 4, but sometimes with numbers when they're larger, if you notice that they're both even, go ahead and divide by 2 because you can always divide again to simplify even further. All right, so 4 is the greatest common factor between these two numbers, but it is okay to do it in 2 steps if you don't notice or don't want to take the time to find the greatest common factor. So we can do that. Sometimes it's just faster to go ahead and divide by 2 like we did here, and then divide by 2 again. It actually can save us time. So just be sure to check each time that you divide, make sure that the fraction is actually as simple as it will go, because otherwise you aren't going to have a simplified fraction, and that's what we were asked to do. All right, so add the following: 5 over 12 plus 1 over 4. Now notice that 4 is a factor of 12. So 4 times 3 gives us 12, which means that 12 becomes the denominator for our equivalent fractions. We already have a 12 for 5 over 12, so we can leave it alone. But over here, we had to multiply 4 by 3 to get 12, so we have to multiply the top by 3. 1 times 3 gives us 3. So we have 5 twelfths and 3 twelfths, so now we can add. And of course, the first step was to make sure that the denominators were the same, which is what we just did. Now we can add the numerators, which is 5 plus 3. Again, notice we keep the denominators the same. 5 plus 3 is 8, so we have 8 over 12. So now we want to simplify the fraction, and the fraction is 8 over 12, which you'll notice that they are both divisible by 4. They have 4 as a factor. So let's divide both the top and the bottom by 4. And 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 2 and 3 have no factors in common. In fact, they are both prime numbers. So this is as simple as it will go. So 5 over 12 plus 1 over 4 equals 2 over 3. Now Barry's wings are 5/6 of a meter long. His brother's wings are 4/7 of a meter long. How much longer are Barry's wings than his brother's? All right, now to determine how much longer Barry's wings are, we need to find the difference, which means subtract. Because we need to know that if their wings are longer, we want to know by how much. So we have to find the difference in the two lengths. So 5 over 6 minus 4 over 7. So we can find a common denominator by simply multiplying the denominators together. And 6 times 7 is 42, and 42 becomes the new denominator for our equivalent fractions. All right, so we had to take 6 and multiply it by 7 in order to get 42. So we also have to multiply 5 times 7, which is going to give us 35. And then we're going to take 4/7, and 7 times, we had to multiply it by 6 to get 42. So we also have to multiply 4 times 6, and we will get 24. So now we can go ahead and subtract our fractions. We have 35 over 42 minus 24 over 42. So again, we make sure the denominators are the same, which is what we just did. So that step is done. Subtract the numerators. So it's 35 minus 24. Again, notice that the denominator is the same. Never add or subtract denominators. Go ahead and subtract. 35 minus 24 is 11, so we end up with 11 over 42. Last step says to simplify the fraction, and 11 and 42 have no factors in common, so this is as simple as it will go. So we have simplified, and we know that Barry's wings are 11 over 42 of a meter longer than his brother's. And that is your lesson on adding and subtracting fractions, part 2.